Correctional Mark Simmons, thank you so much for making the time for us today. Can you please your role and responsibility?
Yes, so I'm one of the 4 assistant commissioners who sits on the Met's management board. I'm responsible for all the local policing across London, so all the borough police that do 999 calls, that investigate most crimes locally, that do your neighbourhood policing. And I've also got some of the crime teams that deal with organised crime and gangs and murder investigation that work for me.
Okay. I know you've touched on media, social media before. However, YouTube and other social sites are often known to make street violence more likely. What is the Met going to do about such communication channels?
So there's a couple of things we're doing. So one of the things we do is we kind of lobby or talk about what control we think there should be over some of the content from the particular providers. Exploring about how can we find material on the internet and the social media channels that might be talking about violence or trying to prompt violence, that sort of thing. So things like use of artificial intelligence, that sort of stuff, to automatically trawl through social media and things like YouTube and say, oh, there's a video here which looks like it's a gang taunting another gang, so we can then try and intervene in that. And we're also trying to get better at where we can see things that look like there's criminal behaviour behind them, be able to identify the source of those. So there's some technical stuff we're working on, but it's a huge challenge because social media is such a vast field.
Okay. In your view, can social media be used as a force for good?
Oh yes, yes. So social media, like everything to do with, I don't know, technology, digital technology, the web, it can be used in all sorts of ways. It's a tool, it's a vehicle. So we were talking earlier on, weren't we, about campaigns. Some of the more successful campaigns in targeting young people at the moment are done through social media, often without any police branding on them at all, but just messages around, the risk of carrying a knife we were talking about before. So people use social media. They can use it for good, they can use it for bad. We think there's a role for using it for good as well.
Okay. Many people in the community says that people get involved with knife crime and even gun crime because the lack of opportunity in life.
So I think
this is true.
yeah. So I think there may be an element of what people see as their opportunities that takes them into some types of behaviour that makes them more likely to get involved in violence. So things like gangs and so on, that may be one of the factors. I do think everyone makes a choice, and the vast majority of people don't get involved in violence, even people who come from places where they don't see much opportunity. So everyone has a choice, and the people who make good choices or bad choices. Of course, the better your opportunities, the better your education, the more stable your family life, you are, better, you've got better preparation for the difficult decisions that come to you. But everyone, from any background, we see most people don't get involved in the type of violence we see, even though it's tempting when we read so much about it, think everyone's involved. They're not. So most people make good decisions, I think, and whatever their opportunity is, whatever their background, and that's what we want to encourage, is helping everyone make better decisions.
I feel that there are too few services provided to help and support young people. Would you believe that by improving such services, we would reduce the knife crime?
So I do think that, firstly, the police on their own can't solve knife crime. We can suppress it a bit, we can't solve it. I said that earlier. There has undoubtedly been a reduction in the number of services for young people over recent years. And one of the things we say very consistently is the police can do so much, but what we really need is we need education to be doing their bit, we need the health service can contribute, we need the voluntary sector to contribute, some of that needs funding, youth services, local authorities, there's so many people that can contribute, not least communities themselves. But as I said earlier, communities need support from the state in order to be able to mobilise, I think, on violence and knife crime. But yes, all those services are really important in my life.
Yeah. Do you believe that people understand the danger associated with carrying a knife?
I think that's really difficult to tell. So part of me says there's so much publicity around knife crime now that people must, particularly young people, must see that. But then I don't think anyone would carry a knife if they thought that meant that they were going to either be at risk of being stabbed or of stabbing someone. So I think there is a gap between the obvious logic that says knife crime, there's a lot of knife crime, carry a knife, that's probably going to be bad. But individuals not recognising that for themselves, I think if it was someone else, I'll be safer with a knife, I'll be more important with a knife, I'll be more kudos or status, whatever it is. I think people don't see beyond that always into what the risks are of carrying a knife for them and for the other people they might be involved with.
And what can we do to prevent people getting involved with the gun and the knife crime?
So I think gun and knife crime are quite different things. So knives are very easy to get hold of first. The most obvious place you can go is the kitchen drawer, and unfortunately there's a lot of kind of more, unpleasant, knives that are more obviously made just for injuring people rather than for use in the kitchen. But knives are very easy to get hold of. Anyone can get a kitchen knife pretty much. Guns are harder to get hold of. Gun crime is actually down quite considerably in London, particularly actual shootings are down, so there's much smaller number and they're much reduced. And it's harder to get hold of a gun. And you have to well, you might tell me differently, but I think broadly you have to have the right contacts, the right networks, the things to be able to find a gun. A knife you can get anywhere. So knife is where we focus on that end of it, I think. We need to keep pushing the message out around the risks of carrying a knife to yourself, to other people. There are things about selling some sorts of knives that so they call them zombie knives or things like that. You look at some of those and you think that's not for slicing bread. That's not, that's got one purpose, and they shouldn't be available. They shouldn't be selling them to anyone, never mind to young people. A lot of that, of course, happens online, which is really difficult to control.
What are your taking-home message about gun and the knife crime?
The take-home message for me is, without wanting to sound cliched, everyone can play a part in it, I think. I've said a couple of times, I think communities, institutions, can play a part in a message that this is not acceptable in my street, in my, block, in my school, and so on. So I think that's the first thing. Everyone can play a part, not tolerate it, not turn a blind eye to it. The second take-home message I think is the one we've talked about a couple of times, is to young people. I'm going to focus on young people because that's the biggest, I think it's the biggest challenge for us, which is, you might think this makes you safer, but it doesn't. You might think it makes you bigger, better, whatever, more status, more kudos, but it doesn't. It just increases the risks. Don't do it. I think those are probably the kind of the key messages I'd say. It's the key messages. The things we see all the time that we say, is that school? So schools across London we look at, because young people go to school, mostly. The schools where the people want to work with us, they want to try, and parents, teachers, other local people want to try and help make the children safer at the school. We've got some places, we've got great initiatives where adults from the school, police, coming through will turn out and sort of be along the bus routes, try and see kids home without getting into fights with people from other schools, that sort of thing. Other places where schools don't think it's their responsibility, and I think it is everyone's responsibility to look after our young people, and that's what we're talking about. So some schools want to work with us on that, some schools don't want to work with us on that. Pupil referral units, so young people who are finding life difficult, get in trouble, quite often go to things called pupil referral units. I guess you've heard of those. Are they places where young people get the support that helps them get back on a straight and narrow educationally, to get out of trouble with on the fringes of gangs, that sort of thing? By and large, no, they're moved there away from other young people, but not necessarily given the support and the help. All those things I think really important, and we have to keep pushing for everyone who can have an influence on young people being involved in violence needs to be.
Okay. I have another question that is not on my list. Earlier on we were talking about factors that influence nowadays criminality. You said that child abuse at early stage at home was among one of the factors. Can you please tell us what type of abuse that would influence a child later on in life to get involved?
So some of the things we talk about, there's something called trauma-informed practice, which says that if a young person goes through trauma in their early life, then that's going to affect the way they react to things in their later life. It can relate in a lot of different ways, and one of those ways it can be in terms of how they then act, whether anger or whatever response in terms of violence. So an increasing understanding about adverse childhood experiences, how they induce trauma in young people, even if it's not kind of recognisable at the time, that later on, or currently, that later on can affect their ability to live normal lives, react normally to difficult circumstances and so on. So recognising that and understand that across police and other professions is an increasing thing we talk about. How do we understand that? The type of thing I'm talking about could be anything. Could be so domestic abuse is that we know for people who get involved in violent crime, quite often a background of domestic abuse is one of the features. And that, yeah, or even being in a household where mum and dad are fighting all the time, because that's emotionally kind of that's a traumatic thing for a young person. So it's not just being beaten; it's in a household where that happens. So it's that sort of thing that we think. The current sort of research says that influences responses then later on.
Is there any advice you can give us today on how we have conducted this interview?
You've been absolutely wonderful to be interviewed by. I go on the news quite often, and you get asked lots of difficult questions with thousands of people listening to the radio programmes and television. You've asked all the questions you've asked about knife crime. I said at the beginning that's the most important thing for us. So I'm always pleased to discuss knife crime with people. I'd rather we're discussing it in the context of it coming, of a greater reduction in it, but that's always important. I said just now, I'm used to being challenged by people in interviews. Some of the questions have been challenging because the role of the police in enforcement can be contentious, particularly in some communities. But no, overall, I think you've been asking about things that are really important for us.
Yes.
Of course, that's for all of us, and that's really good.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, if you're going to give our hand to Mark.